Really, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
He's Bob Pollock from the Extension Service, and he is here to talk about lawns and gardens and things. If you have a question for Bob about your posies, your plants in your garden, your lawn, your trees, your shrubs, give him a call, 479-1160 or 349-WCCS. That's 349-9227. All right, so good morning.
Good morning.
Issues that you're hearing of in lawns and gardens this spring? I know that that one weed that we talked about last year that comes popping up all of a sudden is very, very profligate, let's say. It's back this year, I note, in a lot of yards. And I can't remember what it's called or anything, but
there's a number of them that have germinated well and are doing well right now.
Yeah, the weeds are having this is their season.
It is.
Yeah. I wanted
whether from seed or whether they were perennials that had died back last fall.
Yeah.
But yet the root system was still alive, and so those ones, for example, dandelions will come back up that way.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll disappear. It looks like they're gone, and boom, all of a sudden they're there again.
You have talked recently, probably in the last 6 months, a couple of times, about grass seed and having a blend of grass seeds so that the spring grasses will come on and then they'll sort of ease off a little bit, and then the summer grasses come on, and that blend becomes pretty important and pretty obvious at this time of the year. You can tell in certain patches of lawns where that blend isn't present, and some later season grasses have waited a bit before they've greened up.
Yeah, or just even other species in there, whether it's a fescue or a bluegrass or ryegrass, those will come up. Those will also go to seed at different times as well. So the plant will kind of mature and produce seed. And so some of those species are producing seed right now, and others are just green vegetative growth.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, and the fact that people are probably looking at their lawns right now and noticing bald patches or patches that have had damage over the winter, and they want to seed over that, what are some of the things that they need to be aware of and need to do in order to ensure that seed is going to be successful?
Yeah, and it's good to get, a lot of times you'll have leftover seed, and depending on, it's good if you keep that in the bag to write the year on it that you bought it, so you can kind of keep track at least what year it was you purchased that seed, because if you have it for several years or more, then the germination percentage on that will decline a little bit every year.
So I found a 5-gallon bucket of seed that's probably 15 or 20 years old in my barn. It's probably not worth a whole lot, is it?
Probably not.
Won't hurt to throw it out there, but it's not going to do anything.
No, you can scatter it out there, but that's right. You'll probably have a low germination percentage because it's been there. And depending on the conditions, of course, that it goes under, and then it'll also dry down as well. It'll continue to lose moisture to the point where it just kind of turns to chaff. And
birds will like it, though?
Yeah, the birds will probably still peck at it.
Okay.
All right. They may even refuse it after it gets to a certain point.
So anyway, back to the conversation.
But good fresh seed, and if you have a seed that's a couple years old, or year old, a couple years old, just seed a little extra. Use more of it than you normally would, to help compensate for that lower germination percentage. And then if you're really not sure, get some new fresh seed and add that in there, or just get rid of the other seed and use the new seed. But now is a really good time to get out there and do that. I seeded some spots a week ago, and that seed has started to germinate.
Yeah.
Which is great. That's what we want.
Okay, now talk about preparing the ground for it, though. Do you need to scratch it up a little bit?
It helps. The seed needs to have good contact with the soil in order for it to get moisture. It'll absorb that moisture and plump up, and then that'll allow it to germinate. If it just stays dry, then it'll just lay there. It can lay there for months. Because sometimes if you seed really late in November and conditions are too cold for it to germinate, it'll lay there over winter, and it'll germinate in the spring.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we lose a little bit of germination percentage just from being out over the winter, exposed to our winter weather conditions, and then you might have birds and other things come and chew at it a bit as well to
Is
reduce
that why
the
people
population.
put straw down?
Well, we need some sort of mulch
Okay.
because that also helps ensure that seed is covered. We're just trying to get it covered. Most grass seeds are pretty small, so we don't need very much soil. A lot of times, as long as you just kind of scratch it into the soil, or even mostly covered, those seeds will germinate. But the addition of that mulch helps hold it in place so that when we get a rain event, that mulch on top of there will help kind of knit it in there, keep it in place, keep it from moving off site because we've got loose soil there. So that loose soil is it's easier for rainfall to kind of move that around and move it off where you want it to be. So having that mulch there helps do that. It also helps shade it so that it stays moist longer, which is good because we want that consistent moisture to be there so that seed can absorb that moisture and then germinate and start to grow.
And people want to know about mowing it. How much damage am I going to do if I mow it too soon? Am I going to rip the stuff out of there because it's young and tender?
Yeah. That's possible, depending on your mower, and how big and how much horsepower it has. Young seedlings could be damaged by that, but usually once it's in there 3 to 4 to 5 weeks, oftentimes that's enough. You want to just let it get up enough to where you would normally go in and mow it. That would be, and normal. We don't want to remove more than 1/4 to 1/3 of the leaf surface at any one mowing.
All right.
So that's kind of the target. So when it gets up to that point, mow it. That way you'll just be cutting the tops off. That still lets it, the ground, depending on how deeply you worked it, and for grass you don't need to work the soil very deeply, just enough that you can get things leveled up. If you have to add a little bit of soil in there, you can do that, but enough that seed can just get good contact with the soil and go from there.
He's Bob Pollock from the Extension Service. I showed you pictures of my tree that blew down last week. One of the things, and it blew right on top of my barn roof. Thank you very much. Yeah. It was a twin tree, and the split was at the base, of course. We noticed, though, in the last couple of weeks that over the winter it seemed like the gap between the twins had gotten bigger. So there was some lean going on there, even though the tree's really, really a strong oak tree. When people are assessing the health and the viability of their trees, is there that much change over the course? In other words, how long of a period was that occurring before it was actually noticeable to me for a tree that was over 100 feet tall?
It may not have been noticeable at all until you noticed that it had moved. It may have appeared to be fine, but must have been decay in that root system. Did those two trunks join at the base, or were they kind of two separate seedlings at one time that just came up beside each other?
That.
Yeah. Okay. And a lot of times those trees will still be fine, but in this case there was obviously a weaker root system, or there was some decay going on there that allowed that little bit of movement, and those are things that you want to look for. Yeah. And then that be a signal that, that should not do that.
Now this one was on the edge of the woods line, so it would have structure from other woody materials around it, except for on the side where it fell, where the yard side is. There's obviously no other root structure there. Does that make it susceptible if a tree wants to lean in that direction anyway?
Just because it's leaning doesn't mean it's not attached well, or that it doesn't have an adequate root system. And even in the yard, in the woods, you've got just the other competition from the other trees that are there. But those tend to, because you have other trees there, those trees tend to grow straighter and taller, will have less side branches on them because of the density of that woodlot. And then if you'd planted that same seed out in the open yard, the structure and the growth of that tree may have been a lot different. for the life of that tree, because it had ample room to grow. It probably would have come up, grown more branches, may have been a little shorter, but had a lot more branches, and maybe have a better root system because it didn't have any impediments for that root system to grow.
So for a listener this morning who has a similar situation, they've got woods at the edge of their yard, and there are trees growing there, and there's the possibility that trees are pretty close to a structure of some sort. As they're walking along that woods line, what are they looking for to see if that tree needs to come down before it endangers the structure?
Just observing the structure. So in your case, you noticed a little bit of movement there, leaning away from that other tree that was not normal. Look for voids. So if look up the trunk from the base of the tree up, are there places where there were branches that damaged or died, and now there's a hole there, a void that did not grow over, and so that's a point where water can get into the internal parts of the tree, and over time will cause decay. That decay will then continue to work its way down through the trunk. So oftentimes, when you'll cut a tree down and the whole center will be hollow, and that's because over a period of time there was decay from some point, whether it was hit by lightning or whether there was just limbs or branches that died or split off and were not cut off nicely, so that they could grow new growth over that and wall off that cut surface. Looking at the ground, is there any movement in the ground where when that tree sways in the wind that you can see the ground moving, or where the soil was moved up a little bit, or the leaves that would be there.
Well, after 9 hours.
Just that integrity, and any kind of decay that might be where the roots flare at the base, so that the base of that trunk is usually wider, and then it flares out to where the roots go out. If there's any decay in that point, mushrooms, there are fungi that will grow, start to grow along the base of the trunk like that in spots, and that can be an indication that there's decay there, because those fungus, those mushrooms, have a place to kind of substrate to grow on because they're decaying there.
Well,
so those things will also be indicators.
After 9 hours with the chainsaw the other day, I can tell you there were no holes. It was not hollowed out.
It was a solid tree. But how much of the root system came up?
Yeah, well, none.
None?
No.
It just snapped off at the ground?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's Bob Pollock, Extension. We have to go.
Yeah, we do have to go.
I am Republican Jim Struzzi, candidate to be your next state representative in the 62nd legislature.